So this is the last one, thank God, and it's not going to be long because I see it's written in big characters. So it's not about the new Mass in itself, because we spoke about it for 4 talks, if you remember. Now I'm going to ask you questions about them, and we'll see. Now, this time is about, so what should we do? Because all the things that have been said before, and don't forget that one of the prayers, the one that is read the most, has been written in consecratory prayers, has been written in a restaurant in Rome, and so on. All that. What should we do? Well, it's not difficult to say, well, you shouldn't go to the new Mass. If it's said on an airbed in the sea, for example, that you might know yourselves. There's another new Mass that has been said just recently in Italy again, in the south. He was dressed up, you might have seen pictures of this, was dressed up as a biker, on a bicycle. He had a rainbow stole, and he made up the Mass. He just made it up. He had no book. He just made it up. And then, they were not very prepared for the wind. So the wind blowing, Jesus was gone with the wind. What to do? And they had helpers that went there on the ground and picked up Jesus. Probably picked up nothing but bread, but how can that be the Mass? And there were people all around and so on. And you can see that on the internet, and he just makes it up. He just makes it up. And that's supposed to be Catholic, no? So it's easy enough to say what we should do with that, but what should we do with a whole lot of it? Because in a way they're all the same. Because if someone can do that, if a priest, let's say, can do that kind of Mass, he can because of the principles that have been given to him about the Mass. I'm not going to dress up as a biker because I'm fat and it wouldn't look nice, and say, make up the Mass. I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that. Because I've been instructed in a different way. But that doesn't mean all of it, because you never know. We're all weak and sinful, but to do that kind of Mass, that would be an abomination. But what about all the other Masses that look more pious? Are they okay? Well, all the other Masses reflect what we said before about the new Mass. All those passages we went through. And that should tell you something. Anyway, we start by saying something that St. Thomas himself said in his book, the Summa Theologica. He says that all the sacraments are somehow a declaration of faith. Somehow they declare something about our faith. All the sacraments. He says that when he talks about confirmation. But he says all of them declare our faith. Because a sacrament, it's a sign, we know that from catechism, a visible sign that producing grace. A sign is something that tells you something else. It's a sign that you see there on the road that says, or 50, I don't know how much they say, 30 here maybe, 30. You know, it's 30 miles per hour. Or you see the traffic light is red and you stop. It's a sign that tells you something else, because red doesn't mean stop necessarily. In those circumstances, is understood as to be. In Naples, for example, it doesn't mean stop. It means just do whatever you want. South of Italy. It's not everywhere the same. Anyway, it's a sign. A sacrament is a sign. So it's made up of gestures, actions, and words, and all put together, they mean something. They mean something. You read your missal, it means something. It's not just one word after the other without connection. They mean something. The prayers they mean something about our faith Each prayer of the Mass in itself tells something about what we believe. So the sacraments are a profession of faith in themselves, in the rite that is performed. They are a profession of faith. So they should be a profession of what faith? Of the Catholic faith, of course. Protestants have their own sacraments, or presume to be, and they profess another faith, and they are different, and they say different things, and they mean different things. It's another faith. Muslims have other prayers, and with their prayers they profess their own faith. So our sacraments, our Catholic sacraments, in their wording, in their actions, they profess what we believe. So that's the point that we're going to talk about today. What are the conditions that would make us a valid sacrament incapable of being considered a public profession of the true faith? A public profession of the true faith. What are the conditions that make a sacrament not the public profession of the true faith? And so we have to talk about a sin called the suspicion of heresy. Imagine, suspicion of heresy. Not heresy itself, but suspicion of. Heresy, we're told by St. Thomas, is a kind of infidelity in men who, having professed the faith of Christ, corrupt its dogmas. So this is heresy. Someone corrupting the dogmas of faith. A Christian, of course, corrupting the dogmas of faith. That's a heresy. But suspicion of heresy, it's another kind of sin, nevertheless important. It is a consequence of acts that are against the external profession of faith. Suspicion of heresy is the consequence of acts that in themselves are against the external profession of faith. They're not a denial of faith as such, a denial of the real truth, but they are hardly explicable without a spirit that detaches oneself from the credo of church. It's something that one says, if he sees that doesn't really look Catholic. That person might not be Catholic if he does that. These are the acts that might lead to suspicion of heresy. And if you look into the canon law, the code of canon law, we will be given some examples of what kind of acts would lead to suspicion of heresy. And one is to take part in sacred actions of heretics. So if you were to go to a Church of Ireland Mass, or whatever service they do, they might call it that, and you take part in it, well, you will be suspect of heresy. Because a Catholic wouldn't do that. If you started praying with the Muslims, or if you did some kind of religious act understood by these other religions, you will be suspect of heresy. If you says, I don't want to eat pork, you will be foolish, but also suspect of heresy. And that tells you all vegans are just vegan and vegetarian. They don't really count. They've lost their mind. Anyway, to take part in a worship that is not Catholic, it's an act that makes you suspect of heresy. And if you don't change, you keep going to this worship, you will be considered a heretic, ultimately. It goes step by step. So, take part in an act of worship that is not Catholic. It doesn't matter what you believe interiorly. If you say, well, I'm still a Catholic, but because of, my brother is the pastor of whatever church, I go there, is my brother. It doesn't mean anything what you believe inside. What is important is what you're doing, because you are seen by the whole community, and by your action you are scandalizing others. They might not know that your brother is the pastor. They might not know all the reasons that you have in mind. They just see a Catholic worshipping with non-Catholics. So whatever is in your mind, it doesn't matter concerning this sin. If you do that action, the consequence is that you're suspect of heresy. You would be. So when we try to answer the question, that is the one that I remind you now, what are the conditions that would make a valid sacrament incapable of being considered a public profession of faith? We don't look into what is in the mind of those who are taking part in it. What is in the mind of the priest. We just look at what happens and what we can see, and what the one that doesn't know anyone comes into the church and sees. What does he see? That is important. That is what we consider, not what is hidden in our hearts. That's God's job and the confessors. You see, even a priest who is a heretic, and might be, he can perform, confect a perfectly valid sacrament, perfectly licit and good for others, maybe not for himself, but for others. It doesn't matter what is inside. We don't know. What we know is what we see, first of all. St. Thomas says this again: he who approaches a sacrament receives it from a minister of the church, not because he's such and such a man, but because he's a minister of the church. Consequently, as long as the latter is tolerated in the ministry, he that receives the sacrament from him does not communicate in his sin, but communicates with the church from whom he has his ministry. You see, he says, well, for as long as this man is tolerated and we don't know what is in his mind, fair enough, you can go. So we don't go into this problem. What we're bothered about is what we see. You know, the Novus Ordo priests can be heretic, easily, more easily than others, especially if they say Mass on a floating mattress, blowing up, or these beautiful Masses. If they say Mass for the dog that is buried in Belgium years ago, there was a dog funeral, and it's a beautiful church, but the dog funeral, he had his own coffin, little coffin, and he was commended to the Most High. I mean, come on. We laugh, but that's the Novus Ordo. That's what they stand for. Soon enough, we will see a woman celebrating that kind of ceremony. So it's even worse. The lady priest, the priestess. So Novus Ordo priests can be heretic, of course, but they still are kept there. They are kept in their parish. They are kept in their post, wherever they are. That's the problem. Years ago, when one was an heretic, was judged. If he kept being heretic, he would be put out and said, no, out. You're not allowed. So people wouldn't go to his sacraments because it was out. But now the Novus Ordo priests, even if they are heretic, and anyone who pretends that women can be priests, we said that before, could be easily considered a heretic. I'm not condemning and judging anyone as such, because I have no authority to do so. But I would say that if you believe a woman can be a priest after 2,000 years of tradition say that it cannot be, I would say you're a heretic, or close to, walking towards. And they're kept there. And what about all the bishops in Ireland that signed for women priests? And what about all those who didn't complain? That accepted that. Instead of saying, I'm not represented by them. It means that implicitly they accept it. What are they? So you see, even if the Novus Ordo priests are heretics, they're kept where they are. So it's even more problematic. What do we do? So a sacrament can become incapable of being considered a public profession of faith in three ways, we might say. By modifying the non-essential rites. And non-essential rites are those that do not have a direct effect on the matter and form of the sacrament. So, for example, we change something around the words of consecration of the Mass. These are not essential because they don't affect directly, but indirectly they might. So the sacrament does not manifest what is realized by the sacrament itself and the faith of the Church. Well, it can happen in different ways. For example, when the signs of apostolic or ecclesiastical origin are deeply distorted and manipulated. The signs are the words and the actions. So if these words and actions are deeply manipulated, well, it's a problem. So you change them. So you change the offertory into a Jewish prayer to bless the table. That's a deep manipulation, in my opinion. It might be not yours. Sometimes when these signs, the words and the action, are so modified to manifest errors against the faith or ambiguity, sometimes they change them so much that they mean something that's not even Catholic. So I don't know, for example, the priest that made up the Mass the other day, he might have said something that's not even Catholic at all. That's a problem, because that doesn't manifest certainly the Catholic faith. Manifests his own faith, could be something else. And sometimes both go together. A little manipulation or mixed up somewhere else in the sacraments with a greater manipulation. So that's one way to make a sacrament not capable of being considered a public profession of faith. Another way is by the fact that the minister is rejected by the Church. Sometimes the ministers, the priests, whatever, they are rejected by the Church. Because of what? Because of their heresy. We talked about that just a few minutes ago and said, oh, he's a heretic, he's been judged, he's been condemned, has been deposed from his office. So if he says Mass against the will of the Church, those who go there take part in something that is not Catholic. And so they will be considered suspect of heresy. In history, there's an example of those priests who were swearing the oath to the French revolutionaries. So the Pope condemned them, of course, because they were swearing the oath, and then forbade everyone to take part in their masses. They were priests, they were valid priests. They were celebrating the Mass as more or less we do celebrate. The Mass was right, the priest was valid, but they were outside the Church, condemned, so they couldn't. So in that way, a sacrament is no longer capable of expressing the Catholic faith. And then there is another way. The third way is this: by some circumstances that are not related to the ceremony itself, that is done according to the Catholic tradition and by a minister who is not rejected. So we imagine like a sermon. A priest that preaches heresy, but he says the old Mass, and he's a valid priest and is accepted by the Church. That might happen too. It might happen. So that's also a problem, and we should stay away. So can we apply this to the new Mass? Well, I would say, to make it simple, if we remember what we have said in the past talks, we can say at least about the new Mass that it's ambiguous. It's ambiguous. We don't know what it means. It could mean the meal, the Last Supper, a re-evocation of that, or it could mean the cross, sacrifice of the cross. All depends on what the priest wants to do. But how do we know what is in the mind of the priest? We said that before. We don't know that. What we know is what we see. And what we see is a ceremony that doesn't seem to be Catholic. It's a ceremony that seems to be much more Protestant than Catholic. That's something that honestly, we should all acknowledge. I don't want to be too harsh against the new Mass. Nevertheless, I'm at least convinced that if a Catholic of tradition were to walk into a church today and look at what's happening, he would say, this is a Protestant church. Bring back your grandmothers out of the tomb, out of the grave. Bring them back to life and tell them, now you go to Mass. They walk into their church and they would see something that they've never seen before, or they would say, this is Protestant. That's what they would say. And that's enough for me. That's enough for me. So the problem is that the Mass is supposed to be a profession of faith. It's supposed to be maybe the most important because it's said every single day. Every single day. Catholics go to Mass. Supposed to. And every single day they should profess their faith. It's not like a baptism that is done every time a child is born and so on. Or a confirmation that happens once a year. The Mass is every day. So we should really see the Catholic faith in it. Because the Mass is what people get more commonly, and they feed their own faith through it. So that Mass should feed really them into the Catholic faith. So it has to express the faith, the true faith, traditional faith. And the new Mass doesn't seem to. So when we take part in it, we take part in something that is at least ambiguous in the eyes of everyone. It doesn't matter what we feel. The problem is not what we feel, because religion is not based on what we feel. Religion is just an act of justice towards God. It's to give back God what He expects, what we should give Him back in justice, what we have received from Him, as much as we can. It's just about that. It's not about how I feel. I need to go to Mass. You don't need to go to Mass. You need to please God by going to Mass. You just don't go to any Mass. If that Mass displeases God, just don't go. You cannot go. If the new Mass is ambiguous and displeases God, it doesn't matter what you feel. You don't go. And by not going, you please God. And you're practicing your religion. Maybe you don't lose your faith if you go once in a while to the new Mass. It's not about you. It's about God. The new religion is also about God. It's about getting rid of Him. That's the point. And replace Him with ourselves. If you go to Mass to please yourself, you are already of the new religion. You go to Mass to please God. You practice your religion, your faith, to please God. So every act you accomplish is there to please Him and not you. And not you. I have no choice. I would say the new Mass is shorter. I bet I would get a nicer house and church if I did. Money, hopefully. But it's not about me. It's about pleasing God. The same to you, for you, every single one of you. So to go to the new Mass, it's an act of public worship of something that doesn't seem to be Catholic. That's a new way. Genuflecting. let's keep him for himself now. We don't all do that. Otherwise it's another profession of a different faith. It's important to realize that when we go, it's a public act and is judged as a public act, so we can be scandalous in that action. When a priest mistreats the Blessed Sacrament on the altar, when they distribute the Blessed Sacrament, supposed to be, on plastic cups, when they give it on the hands of people, so that all the particles go away and touch everything and everywhere. So that's a public act of worship, of misworship, a sacrilege that we shouldn't take part in. As I said, you might not lose your faith if you go there once, but that's not the point. It's the way how Jesus is treated. Why would you allow that? Why would you take part in something that treats your God in such a pitiable way? So now, I would say that we shouldn't go to the new Mass. It's an act that leads us not just to lose our faith, but to scandalize others to lose their own faith too. And what about traditional Mass? Are all they good? Well, the priest is good, the Mass is good. But what about, we said before, maybe sometimes for other circumstances that are not attached to the priest or the Mass itself, we shouldn't go. Well, I must say, if you want to be coherent with yourselves, you say that you don't go to the new Mass because it's displeasing God. Well, you have to go a step forward and think, what about the traditional Mass that is said by this priest to say the new Mass at the same time? By the priest to say this Mass in accordance with the rules that the Vatican has established just lately, last year. What are these rules? Well, these rules are simple. That the books promulgated by St. Paul VI, and St. John Paul II, in conformity with the decrees of Vatican Council, are the unique expression of the lex orandi, the prayer of the Roman Rite. If you go to the traditional Mass, you have to accept this, that the new Mass is the only expression. But if the new Mass is the expression of that, of the Roman Rite, it means that the new Mass expresses the faith, the Catholic faith. So shouldn't you go to the new Mass then? And you say, well, I don't go to the new Mass. Well, why would you go to another Mass that is traditional, but you have to say that the new Mass is a good thing? Because you have to. You see, the bishops is to determine that these groups do not deny the validity and legitimacy of the liturgical reform. So if the bishop allows a new and old Mass, said by a priest in a church and so on, it's because it's sure that those people going there accept the new. But if you accept a new one, why wouldn't you just go there? Why bother in going to the old Mass? Because of the bells? Because of the smell? Because of the singing? Then go to the Church of England. They're much better. Didn't you watch the funeral of the Queen? They sing well. If it's all about the bells, the smells, and the singing and all that, again, it's about you. It's about you. It's not about God. It's about you. It's about what you like. But your grandparents didn't go to Mass because they liked it. They went because that was their duty in the eyes of God. I don't think anyone asked them, do you like the Mass? Never. Because that wasn't even contemplated in their mind. You like the Mass? The Mass is the Mass. It's not about I like it or not. So you see, all the old Masses that are said around, if they are said with these principles, that you have to accept the new Mass, that you have to say that the new Mass is the only expression of the Roman Rite, they trick you and make you like them. Pagans with many gods. With many gods. So next to you, you can find the priestess. She's Catholic. She might be ordained in a few years, but she's Catholic. She says the new Mass. You don't like the new Mass, you like the smell and so on of the old, so you don't like the priestess. But she sits at the same table with the priest that says your old Mass. At the same table with the bishop that allows the old Mass to be said, and also worships with the priestess. It's not Catholic. It's Church of England. It's exactly Church of England, where there's a bishop, so-called, a woman priest, a lady priest, a man priest. They say Mass in 20 different ways, for 20 different kind of people. Church of England. They made your Catholic Church something like the Church of England. And it's meant to die. Exactly like the Church of England. It's kept awake and it's kept alive because of the king, of the queen, or all these people. Otherwise, it would be gone years ago. And the Catholic Church, the structure that we see, is going the same direction. So, I wouldn't take part in the new Mass. I wouldn't take part in the other Masses, even if they're old Masses, if they are said with the principle of accepting the new religion. That is not the Catholic faith. Keep that in your mind, and I end now, and we go for tea. It's not about you, religion. It's all about God. Now we say a prayer.
Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Hail Mary, praise the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Glory to the Father, to the Son, and to the Holy Ghost.
Was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end.
Sacred Heart of Jesus. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost.